London, 1970s. Streets filled with strikes, unemployment on the rise, and hope on the decline. The air carried more than pollution, it carried the hopelessness of a generation without a future. It was in this social cauldron that the punk movement exploded, not as a mere soundtrack to the revolt, but as its very incarnation. One band emerged from this chaos like no other: the Sex Pistols. They weren't just musicians, they were the embodiment of the anarchy that echoed through the streets of Britain, and among them, a young man named John Simon Ritchie would transform into something far more disturbing: Sid Vicious. What you're about to hear is the story of how a troubled kid became a punk icon, fell into drugs, found a love as destructive as himself, and ended up at the center of one of rock's most enigmatic cases: the murder of his girlfriend Nancy Spungen, and his own mysterious death shortly thereafter. Not subscribed to the channel yet? What are you waiting for? If you are fascinated by dark and mysterious stories like this one, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Press the red button right now, activate the bell, and join thousands of people who share this same interest in intriguing cases and complex characters from history. Now let's delve into the chaotic history of the Sex Pistols and their most notorious member, Sid Vicious. The Sex Pistols' genesis dates back to 1972, when three London teenagers, Steve Jones vocals, Paul Cook drums, and Wally Nightingale guitar, formed a band called The Strand, also known as Swankers. At that time, the punk movement was still in its infancy, and young people were looking for spaces to gather and express their revolt. The rock clothing stores in Chelsea became the first meeting places for these restless youth. Among these establishments was Too Young to Die, owned by Malcolm McLaren. The store had an assistant named Jordan, who became known for almost single-handedly developing the wild look that would characterize the punk style of the early 70s. In mid-1974, Paul Cook asked Malcolm McLaren to take over the management of the band. McLaren, who was already involved in the music world, agreed. At this time, a young man who worked at the store, Glenn Matlock, asked to join the group as a bass player. The store changed its name to Sex and began to focus on fashion inspired by the retro style of the 1950s. McLaren, who was also promoting the band New York Dolls, returned from a trip to New York in May 1975, showing great interest in the Strand, who were already performing small shows in London. His first action as manager was to arrange for the departure of guitarist Wally Nightingale. Steve Jones, who had been the lead singer until then, took over on guitar, and a search began for a new singer. The band was looking for someone who could not only sing well, but also embody the punk spirit. Many declined the invitation, mainly because they had long hair, which contrasted with the short-haired look favored by the punk movement. The situation changed in August 1975, when they found a 19-year-old wearing a t-shirt with the phrase "I hate Pink Floyd." His name was John Lydon, a boy with very bad teeth, who accepted the offer and showed up to the first rehearsal with his hair dyed green. He chose to sing "M18" by Alice Cooper, impressing everyone and being officially incorporated into the band. At this time, journalist Nick Kent, who had occasionally played as a freelance guitarist, left the project. The band began looking for a replacement, writing an advert that stated, "We want a child guitar prodigy, no older than 20 and no worse than Johnny Thunders." This search resulted in Steve New joining as second guitarist, alongside Steve Jones, although his stay lasted only a month. During this period, the band decided to change their name. Among several options, they chose Sex Pistols, a name that for them represented a young and provocative ideology. Their first official concert took place in November 1975 at the St. Martin's School of Art. From this performance onwards, the Sex Pistols began to secure several shows at London colleges. The band's look quickly became a trend among fans. In the spring of 1976, the group adopted an aesthetic based on their ideology of rebellion: black leather jackets, customized with studs, pins, chains, and hand-painted. At the same time, Malcolm McLaren's store saw a significant increase in sales of custom t-shirts with provocative messages and shocking images. Punks stood out visually with ripped pants, heavy boots, and chains around their necks. The Sex Pistols became the perfect vehicle to convey these ideas, including the ideologies of anarchy. In February 1976, after a show, the band received their first professional review. Although it mentioned that the Sex Pistols' music was not their strong point, it highlighted that the chaos they caused was their real attraction. Over the following months, they performed at several important venues, including the iconic Sem Club pub in London. Audiences and fans began to see punk rock as the necessary future for London. Simultaneously, the Sex Pistols got into their first fights, which would become a regular occurrence at almost every show. Interestingly, at the same time, the Ramones were consolidating themselves as a strong image of punk rock. But the Sex Pistols rejected them, mainly because they didn't like the aesthetic they represented, since they had long hair, something that contrasted with the look of British punks. In mid-April, they performed several shows in small towns in the north of England and began recording some demos. In May, they performed in Manchester and again in June at the famous Free Trade Hall. Manchester came to know and embrace punk rock, triggering the birth of the movement in the region. In July, two London punk rock bands, The Clash and The Damned, made their debuts as opening acts for the Sex Pistols, marking the beginning of a greater camaraderie among London punk bands. Even the Sex Pistols, on a night off, attended a Ramones gig at the famous Dingwall's pub. In the following months, the band released several songs with radical lyrics. In September, they began a tour of Great Britain, and the following month, they signed a contract with the record label EMI, marking the beginning of studio recordings. They had the participation of producer Chris Thomas, known for his work in the production and mixing of Pink Floyd's album, The Dark Side of the Moon. During this period, they produced their first singles, which bore the hallmarks of punk albums, with black covers devoid of words or details. The media intensified its coverage of the Sex Pistols, resulting in a wave of concert cancellations by authorities and organizers, who feared sheltering the band and their fans. Despite this, new concerts were scheduled, and by January 1977, they had 3 concerts scheduled for the Netherlands. Trouble began to emerge when, on the morning of January 4th, all the members of the Sex Pistols arrived at Heathrow Airport in London hungover. On the way to their flight, they were seen vomiting, which attracted even more attention. These events were sensationalized by the press, generating political pressure. For many, the band was seen as fueling moral panic. The record company EMI, pressured by the controversy, withdrew the contract. Journalists and tabloids flooded the public with sensationalist stories about the Sex Pistols, increasing their reputation for chaos and controversy. The following month, Malcolm McLaren announced that bassist Glenn Matlock was leaving the band. According to McLaren, Glenn was fired because he talked too much about Paul McCartney. It was later revealed that, despite being a good musician and composer, Glenn did not have the profile expected of a member of the Sex Pistols. And, to make matters worse, he really liked the Beatles, something considered incompatible with the essence of punk. A search began for a new bass player who would embody the spirit of the Sex Pistols and punk rock, and they found the perfect young man to fill that role. After Glenn Matlock's departure, he was replaced by John Lydon's friend, now known as Johnny Rotten, the troubled, childish, but fun and laughing 19-year-old Sid Vicious. From the beginning, the other band members clearly considered him unstable, but agreed that his look was exactly what the Sex Pistols needed. Sid grew up in southeast London, and his real name was John Simon Ritchie. He was just another young man of the time, living in a dysfunctional family environment. His father, a jazz trombonist and guard at Buckingham Palace, completely rejected him. His mother, Anne Beverly, tried to raise him alone and, in a moment of desperation, even turned to selling drugs to support them both. Sid and his mother later moved to East London, where he met John Lydon. During this time, Anne's drug addiction led Sid to seek educational and emotional support at Westminster Kingsway College. There, he shared with a counselor his difficult home situation, even mentioning suicidal thoughts. The counselor, feeling unable to cope, referred him to someone else, but no one seemed to be very interested in helping the young man. At 16, Sid was kicked out of his home and began living mainly on the streets, relying on the help of friends. Around the age of 17, there was a curious incident involving John Lydon's hamster, also named Sid. The hamster bit his hand, which he responded by saying, "Sid is really vicious." It was from this moment that John began calling him Sid Vicious. Although John Lydon was his best friend, Sid was also part of a group known as the John Quartet, which included 2 other friends with the same name. The 4 frequently visited punk shops, especially Malcolm McLaren's. At the time, John had his band The Strand, but he still played on the streets with Sid to make some money. While John played the violin, Sid played the guitar. They used to do Alice Cooper covers, and the audience would often give them money just to get them to stop playing. In 1976, Sid co-founded the band Flowers of Romance, performing as vocalist and saxophonist alongside Keith Levine, guitarist and co-founder of The Clash. During this period, he learned to play bass by listening to the Ramones' first album. That same year, he attended a Sex Pistols concert at the Sem Club pub, where he got into a fight with the band's former guitarist, Nick Kent. Nick was allegedly blocking Sid's view, and Sid attacked him with a motorcycle chain. The blow caused a head injury, resulting in a lot of blood, but he did not press charges. Later, Sid was involved in something even more serious during a show by the band The Damned, also at the Sem Club. At the time, he was drunk and under the influence of amphetamines when he threw a glass on stage. The object hit a pillar, which broke and scattered shrapnel, injuring a girl's eye and leaving her blind. Sid was arrested, and, after this incident, the Sem Club pub decided to ban performances by punk rock bands. It was in this context that Sid joined the Sex Pistols. Although everyone in the band knew about his troubled history, his eccentric personality seemed to somehow fit in with the group's chaotic essence. At least that was the case until the first rehearsals began to become a nightmare. The other members quickly realized that Sid was questionable as a musician. However, by that time, the Sex Pistols had stopped being about music. The band's trajectory was turning into pure sensationalism, marked by violent shows and opinions considered offensive by public opinion. Sid himself noticed this change and decided that he would just have fun while he could. After all, in a short time, he had become one of the stars of London punk rock. Sid loved the attention of the press, the money, and the fact of being noticed. However, the once childlike and cheerful Sid Vicious began to descend into a dark world of drug abuse. Things would take an even darker turn when he met Nancy Spungen, a 19-year-old New York sex worker and drug addict. Like Sid, Nancy had a complicated childhood, but her story was even more confusing. At birth, she nearly suffocated to death by her own umbilical cord. Doctors told her parents that there was probably no brain damage, but she was showing symptoms of severe cyanosis, a condition in which blood flows through the skin with little or no oxygen. Nancy required special care before she was discharged. At home, he was a crybaby, violent and prone to constant screaming. At 3 months of age, the pediatrician prescribed a liquid barbiturate normally used in cases of seizures. Even so, his behavior remained strange and explosive. In the years that followed, new problems arose, such as when, at age 10, Nancy threatened the family's babysitter with scissors and tried to attack her psychiatrist. The psychiatrist informed her parents that Nancy's behavior revolved around her need for attention. At the age of 11, she was expelled from school due to repeated absences. Her parents decided to transfer her to a school in Pennsylvania. However, Nancy ran away and attempted suicide, unsuccessfully. At the age of 15, her psychiatrist diagnosed her with schizophrenia. Despite this, she resumed her studies and managed to graduate in 1974. At 16, she was accepted into the University of Colorado at Boulder. Life seemed promising, but Nancy ended up being arrested for trying to buy marijuana from an undercover police officer. She was later arrested again after being found in possession of stolen goods that she had hidden in her dorm room. As a result, the university expelled her. The following year, Nancy left home and moved to New York, where she began living on the streets as a sex worker. Interestingly, she also got a job as an amateur music journalist, in addition to doing other odd jobs in clothing stores. In her free time, she got close to members of famous bands such as Aerosmith, Bad Company, New York Dolls, and Ramones. In December 1976, he traveled to London with members of the Heartbreakers and met the Sex Pistols. That same night, she met Sid Vicious, although the relationship between the two did not begin immediately. Only about a year later, they started dating. By that time, Nancy was clearly already a heroin addict, and her emotional state was completely destroyed. As a result, Sid began to significantly increase his drug use and gradually distanced himself from the band. His friend and Sex Pistols frontman Johnny Rotten realized that Nancy posed a risk to Sid and tried to drive her away. John would later report that in his vision, Nancy seemed to be on a slow suicide mission. and that she wanted to take Sid with her. Sid's decline became clear in the following months, when the Sex Pistols signed a contract with AM Records. During a press event held outside Buckingham Palace, all the band members were drunk. However, Sid went further, breaking a toilet, while Johnny Rotten started a verbal argument with the record company members. A few days later, the group was involved in a fight with another band in a pub. During the confrontation, John's friends threatened a friend of the AM Records director. As a result, the record company decided to break the promising contract with the Sex Pistols. Additionally, approximately 25,000 copies of the single God Save the Queen, which had already been produced, were destroyed. The band later secured a new contract, this time with Virgin Records, which allowed the single to be released. However, during the launch campaign, workers at the factory responsible for producing the album protested against the lyrics of the song and, especially, against the cover art. The cover featured an image of Queen Elizabeth II, with her face obscured by cutout letters that formed the song title and the band's name. The lyrics contained provocative phrases such as "she is not a human being" and "there is no future in England's dreams." The single was banned by television stations such as the BBC, as well as being removed from the programming of several independent radio stations, becoming the most censored album in British history. Paradoxically, this ended up contributing to the Sex Pistols' fame. Although the musical impact was marred, the social impact has been described as punk's crowning glory. Taking advantage of the controversy, the single was strategically timed to be released during Queen Elizabeth II's Silver Jubilee celebrations. In less than 2 weeks, the album sold more than 150,000 copies. As part of the promotion, the Sex Pistols performed on a boat that sailed along the River Thames, passing iconic locations such as Westminster Pier and the Houses of Parliament. The event was clearly a mockery of the royal celebrations. In response, London's Metropolitan Police forcibly shut down the show, briefly arresting the band members. Meanwhile, God Save the Queen reached number 2 on the UK albums chart. This resulted in a significant increase in the Sex Pistols fan base, as well as attracting a growing number of young people to the punk movement. However, not everyone was happy with the band's success. One day, lead singer Johnny Rotten was attacked by an armed gang at the Pegasus pub in Islington. During the attack, he suffered serious injuries, including damage to the tendon in his left arm. The other members of the band were also targeted, in separate incidents, and just 3 days after the first incident, John was brutally beaten again. The Sex Pistols began to be described as enemies of the public and considered rivals of local gangs. So, to avoid having their shows ruined, the band decided to publicize their tour dates under the pseudonym Spots. During this period, Malcolm McLaren was motivated to start raising the budget for a film about the Sex Pistols. This resulted in the creation of a number of short films that included footage of the incident on the River Thames, which further contributed to the band's fame and excited many fans. Meanwhile, Sid Vicious was becoming increasingly unstable, and his lack of musical ability was becoming a glaring problem. Johnny Rotten and the other band members did everything they could to keep him from taking part in the studio recordings. This frustrated Sid, but it gave him more time to spend with Nancy. In November 1977, Sid went to a rehearsal room to prepare the band's repertoire. However, 3 members did not show up, something that had happened several times that week. Sid was upset and showed his dissatisfaction. The rehearsals were crucial because Malcolm McLaren was organizing a 3-month tour for the band, and time was running out. In addition, the Sex Pistols film project had been shelved by Malcolm, which caused discouragement among the members. For Sid, the failure of the film was not a bad thing. He believed that the production would end up destroying the spirit of the band. In an interview, he stated that, in his view, he was the diabolical bass player in rock music of all time. Regarding the film, he commented, "It's stupid. Why can't the Sex Pistols just tour and play?" However, this was not the reality of the band, and this frustrated him deeply. Sometime later, there was a show that Sid considered incredible. However, discouragement soon took over the band again, especially due to the constant absence of the members from rehearsals. Because of all this, at one point, Sid, who was staying at the Ambassador Hotel in Bayswater, had a fit and tried to jump from the 3rd floor. The incident only didn't happen because Nancy managed to catch him in time. However, Sid did not like being interrupted. So he grabbed Nancy by the hair and slammed her head repeatedly against the wall, hard enough to make her bleed. Just as Nancy was about to lose consciousness, Sid stopped and began to cry. 2 hours later, the hotel receptionist, who had heard the knocking during the fight, decided to enter the room. Upon seeing blood on the wall, she immediately called the authorities. Nancy was questioned and had one of her prescription medications confiscated. However, she did not report it, and both were later released. However, the press sensationalized the incident, generating even more controversy than the rumors had already created. The situation was enough for the band to decide it was time to get rid of Nancy once and for all. With the support of the organizers, they tried to send her back to New York, but Nancy saw through the plan and foiled the attempt. Sid, angered by the situation, left the band and plunged into rampant drug use along with his partner. Even so, he was taken on the tour, which was already facing difficulties to start due to problems with vocalist Johnny Rotten's visa, caused by his criminal record. As a result, many shows in the northeastern United States could not be held. Early in the tour, during a stop in Memphis, Sid was arrested for trying to buy drugs. After being released, he was beaten by a group of security guards from Warner Bros., the record company that invested in the band. At one of the shows, before going on stage, Sid took a razor and wrote "Gimme Life" on his chest. According to him, trying to end his life in this way would not work. Of course, the newspapers of the time portrayed the incident in the worst possible light. After that, in San Antonio, during a show, Sid went on stage insulting fans and ended up being hit by a beer can. In another show, he attacked a member of the audience with his bass. In Dallas, during an episode of heroin withdrawal, he spat blood on a fan who had climbed on stage. In response, she punched him in the face. When leaving the stage, Sid also got into a fight with a photographer and attacked one of the security guards. In addition, he caused a fight with one of his own bodyguards. Eventually, Sid was admitted to a hospital to treat his injuries from the previous night. To make matters worse, while this was happening, lead singer Johnny Rotten was using drugs, uncontrollably and also out of his mind. Guitarist Steve Jones and drummer Paul Cook would later say that the two were impossible to live with. Whenever they took their eyes off Sid, he would start a fight, while John was on his own trip, convinced he was God. And so, after just 7 shows on tour, Johnny Rotten and Malcolm McLaren severed their connections, and the band was on the verge of collapse. Although the Sex Pistols tour was eagerly anticipated in several cities across the United States, the band's rapid decline dashed all expectations. On January 17, 1978, the members traveled to Los Angeles. Sid was in a deplorable condition, but with the help of a friend, he managed to get to New York. There, he consumed a mixture of Valium and methadone, which led to him being hospitalized. John traveled to visit him, and at that moment, he realized that this was the end of the Sex Pistols. The following day, at a final show without Sid Vicious, Johnny Rotten officially announced the end of the band. With the help of Virgin Records label boss Richard Branson, he managed to secure a ticket back to London. For the next few months, Sid remained in New York with Nancy Spungen, immersed in self-destructive behavior. Meanwhile, the other band members took part in the production of Malcolm McLaren's film about the history of the Sex Pistols, using the group's turbulent dissolution as part of the plot. Johnny Rotten, however, decided not to participate in the project and began preparing a lawsuit against Malcolm McLaren and the Pistols' management company, Glitterbest. The charges included non-payment of royalties, misuse of the title Johnny Rotten, unfair contractual obligations, and damages caused by all the criminal activities that had taken place. At the same time, John began forming a new band, Public Image Limited, with former Clash member Keith Levine and his school friend Jaw Wobble. They would later achieve a top 10 hit in the UK with the single Public Image. Meanwhile, Sid and Nancy settled into the Chelsea Hotel in Manhattan, New York. Nancy took on the role of Sid's manager, who was planning a solo career. In September 1978, he recorded new songs and began production on his album Sid Sings. However, as in other moments in the history of the Sex Pistols, Sid would be the protagonist of another dramatic episode. This time, however, events would take a macabre turn. On the morning of October 12, 1978, the Chelsea Police Department received a call to the Chelsea Hotel. At the scene, the first officers were informed by staff that the lifeless body of Nancy Spungen had been found in the bathroom of the apartment she shared with Sid Vicious. She had a deep, fatal wound to the abdomen. Sid was found by the hotel staff, wandering disoriented down the hallway. He was arrested by Sergeant Thomas Kilroy. During the initial interrogation, Sid confessed that the two had argued the night before and also claimed that he had stabbed Nancy, but that he had not intended to kill her. However, when he was taken to give a statement, now a little soberer, he claimed not to remember anything that had happened. Investigations began and soon revealed that the night before, Sid and Nancy had thrown a party at their apartment. Several attendees were questioned, and it was confirmed that Sid had consumed a large quantity of drugs, including 30 Tuinal tablets. This made it difficult to identify everyone who entered and left the apartment that night. Some witnesses claimed that Nancy was alive until 5 o'clock in the morning and claimed that Sid's condition made it impossible for him to have committed the murder. Despite this, due to his initial confession, he was charged with second-degree murder. The knife used in the crime was found in the apartment and identified as a Jaguar Caliban, purchased by Nancy a few days earlier as a gift for Sid. With the main suspect in the crime arrested, Malcolm McLaren immediately tried to hire renowned lawyers to defend him, but was unsuccessful. However, Jan Maber, a lawyer from Malcolm's firm, managed to secure Sid's release upon payment of a $50,000 bail provided by the Sex Pistols record label, Virgin Records. One of the conditions of his release was that Sid remain in New York and report daily to the district attorney's office. After his release, he returned to his apartment at the Chelsea Hotel, where he was cared for by his mother, Anne Beverly, and Malcolm McLaren. Both men firmly believed in his innocence. Sid's attorney argued that his defense would be based on the theory that the knife used to murder Nancy Spungen was in the same drawer where the couple kept their money. Thus, the defense and Malcolm McLaren believed that one of the party guests had tried to steal the money, but was interrupted by Nancy, which would have led to the crime. To support this theory, an investigator was hired, and forensic expert Step Teach was called in to speak with Sid Vicious. However, the conversation was frustrating. Sid was completely unfocused and, when questioned, only wanted to talk about the working class in Berlin while staring at the television. The incident seemed to have deeply affected Sid's mind, which was already weakened by excessive drug use. According to Stephen, Sid could not be left alone, but that was not possible. Then, a few hours later, Sid tried to slit his wrists with a broken light bulb. When first responders arrived, he tried to jump out of his bedroom window, but was stopped. Sid was admitted to Bellevue Hospital and later transferred to a hospital in White Plains, New York. On November 26th, he was released and returned to the Chelsea Hotel. By this time, Johnny Rotten was aware of the events and tried to contact Sid, but Malcolm McLaren would not allow him to approach. 2 days later, Sid was interviewed by journalist Bernard Clark. During the interview, when asked about Nancy's death, Sid stated that she always said she would die before she turned 21. And when Bernard asked him where he would like to be at that moment, Sid replied, "I would like to be underground." As Christmas approached, the remaining members of the Sex Pistols reunited to record a Christmas album to raise funds for Sid's defense. They also sold t-shirts with the slogan, "Shez dead, im alive, im yours." On the other hand, Sid, who was awaiting the outcome of the legal process, began to start several relationships. He got involved with the young punk Joy Nylon, and also with drug addicts Connie Grip, D.D. Ramone's ex-girlfriend, and Michelle Robinson. On December 5th, Sid attended a party at the Hurrah nightclub in New York City, where the punk band Skafish was performing. During the event, he attempted to flirt with Tara, the band's drum technician. However, when rejected, Sid pinched the woman. Tara's boyfriend, Todd Smith, intervened, and a fight broke out. During the confrontation, Sid broke a beer bottle and attacked Todd, who required 5 stitches to his face due to the injuries. The authorities were called, and Sid was arrested for assault. When he was taken to court, the judge ruled that he had violated the terms of his bail. He was arrested again, but before being sent back to detention, he was ordered to undergo detox. More than a month later, Sid appeared in court and was released on bail, this time for $10,000. The conditions for his release were reduced. He only had to report to a police station 3 times a week. However, one additional condition was imposed. He was prohibited from visiting nightclubs and had to continue a detox program at Rikers Island prison. Sid's defense was excited by the news of the incident. They believed that the incident could help in his future trial. His mother, Anne Beverly, even told reporters that the public would now see that her son was a good boy. However, SID's actions would lead to an unexpected outcome, surprising everyone involved. On the morning of February 1st, 1979, Sid Vicious was released from Rikers Island, where he had completed a detox program. He then headed to Manhattan. There, he met up with his old friend Peter Kotick. The two talked for a while, and Sid asked Peter to get him some heroin. Peter then purchased the drugs and brought them to the apartment where Sid was staying, along with several other people, including his mother, Ann Beverly. In the following hours, some people began to leave the area as heroin use increased. The apartment's owner, Michelle Robinson, was also present, as were members of bands such as Misfits and the Heartbreakers. After dinner, around 11 o'clock at night, Jerry Only from the Misfits noticed Sid dozing and tried to wake him up with a few slaps. However, Sid's mother covered him with a blanket and assured him that he would be fine. Jerry, knowing that Sid had been clean for some time, decided not to press the issue. Later, one of the friends present, Peter Gravel, gave Sid 4 more barbiturates to help him sleep. After that, everyone left. The next morning, Ann Beverly and Michelle Robinson found Sid dead. Ambulances were quickly called, but Sid was already dead, apparently from an overdose. His mother stated that Sid's death could not be ruled an accident. According to Ann, she had previously found a letter in one of Sid's jackets in which he mentioned having a suicide pact with Nancy Spungen and asked to be buried next to her. Nancy's sister Deborah Spungen confirmed this story, saying that Sid had sent a letter during his detox process in which he claimed to have promised Nancy that he would kill himself if anything happened to her. To Sid, this was simply a final commitment between the two. However, Nancy had been buried in a Jewish cemetery in Pennsylvania, and Sid could not be buried there. Because of this, he was cremated in New Jersey. Ann Beverly asked Deborah for permission to scatter Sid's ashes on Nancy's grave, but her family would not allow it. Nevertheless, Ann and some friends went to the cemetery and, from a fence near Nancy's grave, scattered the ashes. After Sid's death, many versions of the nature of the tragedy emerged, and it remains a point of debate and mystery in rock history to this day. Some people claim that Sid Vicious' death was purely accidental, and argue that, as intense as Sid's relationship with Nancy was, he would never have taken his own life. The fact is that his death made headlines for several days in renowned newspapers, which also extensively explored the troubled relationship between the two. The following year, the album that Sid had been producing was released. Notably, the album cover featured an image of the moment when Sid's body was removed from the apartment where he died. The album was very well received by the public, who continued to idolize Sid as a punk icon. Over time, many artists and songwriters have come to portray Sid Vicious as the epitome of what is most authentic in punk rock, the skinny rocker with a lot of attitude. On the other hand, Johnny Rotten, lead singer of the Sex Pistols, stated that all the good things about Sid ended when he joined the band. According to Lydon, Sid felt isolated because he was not the best musician among them. In 1986, the film Sid and Nancy Love Kills was released, and was widely regarded as a sensitive and even gentle portrayal of the couple's story. The film presented Sid as a young man lost and perplexed by life. 10 years later, Sid's bass guitar, a white Fender Precision bass with a black pickguard and a leather strap engraved with the name Sid, was sold to former band member Steve Jones for $2,200, the equivalent of nearly $12,000 today. Later, Sid Vicious' famous suit was also auctioned for $10,000, or about $63,000. In 2006, the Sex Pistols were honored with induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. However, the surviving members refused to attend the ceremony. More recently, in January 2021, FX announced that it was producing a series about the Sex Pistols, which premiered the following year. Public reception was mixed, and Johnny Rotten harshly criticized the series, calling it disrespectful. After its release, he attempted to sue the producers to prevent the use of Sex Pistols music, but was unsuccessful. In addition to all of these events, in the years that have passed since Nancy and Sid's tragic end and the cultural impact they left, numerous theories about Nancy's death have emerged. These speculations have intensified because the investigation was closed with Sid's death, leaving many aspects of the story without definitive answers. In 2007, a man named Phil Strongman published a book in which he presented the theory that actor Rockets Redglare had murdered Nancy. According to him, Rockets knew about the money the couple had hidden in the drawer and was present at the party on the night of the crime. At the time, Rockets publicly denied the accusations. However, people close to him claimed that Rockets had confessed to the murder on a few occasions. The problem was that Rockets was known for his habit of telling exaggerated stories to get attention, which made him an unreliable suspect. Furthermore, in the same book, Phil Strongman pointed to a possible culprit, Neon Leon, who lived in the same apartment complex and who was found with some of Sid Vicious' belongings, including his leather jacket. When questioned by the authorities, Neon claimed to have received the items from Sid himself as a gift and agreed to return them. The suspicions about Neon go even further, as he allegedly told someone close to him that he knew who the killer was, although he did not reveal the name. He later denied this version. On the other hand, there are those who believe that Sid Vicious was, in fact, the culprit. People close to the couple reported that violence between Sid and Nancy was frequent and almost normal in the relationship. Although Sid was generally kind in front of other people, Nancy herself confided to Johnny Rotten's wife, Nora Foster, that she was frequently assaulted by him. Furthermore, Nancy's mother shared with authorities that in a conversation, Nancy had admitted that the marks of aggression on her body were not caused by strangers, as she often said, but by Sid himself. Despite this, witnesses also described Nancy as verbally abusive and physically aggressive towards Sid, making their relationship a fertile ground for an impulsive and tragic outcome, such as a stabbing. Investigators at the time believed Sid was guilty, based on his initial confession, the position in which the body was found, the location of the murder weapon, and the circumstances of a toxic and self-destructive relationship. However, because the case was never officially closed, Nancy Spungen's death is now viewed as a mysterious murder case, in which Sid remains the most likely suspect. It is possible that the public's love for Sid and his legacy contributed to the ongoing doubt about his guilt. Sid Vicious' death is often remembered as yet another tragic loss in the dark world of music in the 1970s, a reflection of the intensity and self-destruction that marked his brief but notorious existence. So, what did you think of this intriguing story? If you enjoyed learning more about Sid Vicious, the Sex Pistols, and this case that still generates discussions today, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Leave a like, share it with friends who like rock and mystery stories, and most importantly, leave a comment with a case from rock history that you would like to see in our next video. We are always looking for suggestions to bring you content that you want to watch. See you in the next episode.